The hallway was empty. Not unusual, 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, 3 hours before taping, but this emptiness felt different. The kind that settles into the walls of a place that knows its time is ending. Stage 1 at NBC Burbank had seen 30 years of laughter, 30 years of America gathering in living rooms to watch a man in a suit make the day disappear for 90 minutes. But on May 21st, 1992, the hallway knew what was coming. Johnny Carson's dressing room door was halfway open. Ed McMahon stood outside it, holding 2 cups of coffee he'd poured from the craft services table. Decaf, both of them. They'd stopped drinking the real stuff years ago, around the time their doctors started using words like blood pressure and at your age. Ed looked at the door, then at the coffee, then back at the door. 30 years, and he still wasn't sure if he should knock. He didn't. He pushed the door open with his elbow, careful not to spill, and found Johnny standing at the window. Not sitting at his desk where the monologue cards were spread out. Not in front of the mirror where he'd adjust his tie 17 times before deciding it looked exactly the same as when he started. Just standing, looking out at the parking lot where the crew was unloading equipment for a show that would be the last of 4,531 episodes. "Brought you something that pretends to be coffee," Ed said. Johnny didn't turn around immediately. He finished whatever thought he was having first, then accepted the cup without looking at it. "They're setting up the chairs differently out there." "Yeah?" Closer together, Nancy said they're expecting more people than usual. Ed knew this already. Everyone knew. The audience lottery had received over 3 million requests. People were offering thousands of dollars for a seat. But Johnny said it like he was reporting the weather, that same measured tone he'd used to introduce every guest from Bette Davis to a trained seal that couldn't do the trick. "Makes sense," Ed said. "It's the last one." Johnny took a sip of the coffee, made a face. "This is terrible." "I know. Why do we drink it?" "Because we're supposed to." Johnny almost smiled. Almost. That fractional movement at the corner of his mouth that most people missed, but that Ed had learned to read like Morse code over 3 decades. It meant, "You're right, and I hate that you're right, and I'm tired." The dressing room hadn't changed much since 1972, when they'd moved to Burbank from New York. Same desk, same couch that had hosted 1,000 pre-show conversations about divorces and ratings and whether the Carson Productions deal with NBC was fair. The walls held photos, Johnny with Bob Hope, Johnny with Reagan before he was president, Johnny with a young David Letterman who looked terrified. But no family photos. Never family photos. That was the rule Johnny never spoke, but everyone understood. Ed sat down on the couch without being invited. His knees made a sound. "You rehearsed the goodbye?" he asked. "No." "You should probably." "I'm not rehearsing it, Ed." Silence. Not the comfortable kind they developed over the years, the kind that let them sit through commercial breaks without needing to fill air. This was the other silence, the one that had started appearing more frequently in the last 6 months, ever since Johnny had made the announcement. A silence that had weight to it, like furniture being moved in the room above you. Ed looked at his coffee. "Bet called." "Yeah. Wants to come to the taping. I told her we're full, but she said she'd stand in the back. Tell her no." "Johnny, tell her I said thank you and no." It wasn't cruel the way he said it. Just final. Johnny had that ability to close a door so quietly you didn't realize you were locked out until you tried the handle later. Ed had watched him do it with 3 wives, a dozen producers, and countless friendships that got too close to whatever line Johnny had drawn around himself. "You know she's just trying to." "I know what she's trying to do." Johnny set his coffee down on the desk, still mostly full. "Everyone's trying to do something, commemorate, celebrate, capture the moment, make it mean something. Doesn't it?" Johnny looked at him then, really looked, and Ed saw something he'd only glimpsed a handful of times in 30 years. Not sadness exactly. More like the face of a man who'd been holding his breath underwater and just realized he was deeper than he thought. "I don't know," Johnny said. The intercom on the wall crackled. "Mr. Carson, we need you for a quick tech check in 20 minutes. Johnny pressed the button. Copy. He didn't let go of the button right away, just stood there with his thumb on it, like he was considering saying something else, then decided against it. Story of his life, Ed thought. The things Johnny Carson didn't say could fill more shows than the things he did. Ed stood up, his knees protesting again. I should go check on Doc. How is he? Old, like us. We're not old, Johnny said, but there was no conviction in it. We're experienced. That's what old people say. This time Johnny did smile, a real one, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made him look briefly like the kid from Nebraska who'd done magic tricks for nickels. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then it was gone, and he was back to being Johnny Carson, the man who'd become so good at being Johnny Carson that sometimes Ed wondered if there was anything else left. I'll see you out there, Ed said, heading for the door. Ed? He stopped, turned. Johnny was looking at the photos on the wall now, hands in his pockets. You ever think about what we would have done if this hadn't worked out? Every day of my life. Really? No, Ed smiled. Never once. This was always going to work. Bullshit. Complete bullshit, Ed agreed. But we believed it anyway. He left before Johnny could respond, pulling the door most of the way closed behind him. Not all the way. Never all the way. That was another unspoken rule. Johnny's door was never fully closed unless he'd closed it himself. Some kind of psychological thing, Ed figured. A man who controlled everything in front of the camera needed to feel like he could still control what happened behind it. The hallway was still empty. Ed walked toward the studio floor, past the writer's room, where 3 guys were frantically rewriting jokes that Johnny would probably ignore anyway. Past the makeup department, where Charlene was setting out brushes she'd been using on Johnny's face since Ford was president. Everyone moving with purpose, with the kind of focused energy that comes from knowing you're part of something ending. But Ed wasn't thinking about that. He was thinking about 1962, a studio in New York so cold you could see your breath during commercial breaks. Johnny's first week as host, the reviews had been mixed. Some critics said he was too stiff, too rehearsed, not warm enough. Ed had found him after the Friday show, sitting alone in the dressing room, tie loosened, looking at the desk like it had betrayed him. It's not working, Johnny had said. It's been 4 days. I can feel it. The audience doesn't trust me yet. So make them trust you. How? Ed had sat down then, on a couch that wasn't nearly as nice as the one they had now, and said something he'd never been sure was right, but that Johnny had apparently needed to hear. Stop trying to be Jack Pear. Stop trying to be Steve Allen. Just be the guy who showed up. Johnny had looked at him for a long time, then nodded. Didn't say thank you. He rarely did. But the next Monday, something had shifted. The suit was the same, the jokes were the same, but Johnny had stopped performing at the audience and started performing with them. That's when it clicked. That's when he became who he became. 30 years later, Ed wondered if Johnny even remembered that conversation. The studio floor was controlled chaos, cameras being positioned, lights adjusted. The band setting up, Doc Severinsen in a jacket so colorful it looked like a migraine, Tommy Newsom already looking tired. The audience seats were filling up early, people who'd won the lottery and couldn't believe their luck, treating this like a sacred event. Which it was, Ed supposed. An era ending. The man who'd outlasted Vietnam, Watergate, 3 presidents, countless wars and scandals and cultural shifts, finally stepping away from the desk. The desk that had become more famous than most of the people who sat across from it. Fred de Cordova, the producer, appeared at Ed's elbow. Have you talked to him? Just now. How is he? Johnny. Fred nodded like this explained everything, which it did. He's not going to cry, is he? No. Good. America can't handle Johnny Carson crying. America can't handle a lot of things, Ed said. We gave them Johnny Carson instead. Fred looked at him oddly, then moved on to yell at someone about the lighting. Ed watched the crew work. These people who dedicated years to making 90 minutes of television look effortless every night. Most of them would have jobs next week, next month. But it wouldn't be the same. Nothing would be. 20 minutes later, Johnny emerged from the hallway. He'd changed into his suit. A gray one, perfectly tailored, nothing flashy. His tie was straight. His hair was exactly right. He looked like he always looked, which was the point. No grand statement. No costume change to mark the occasion. Just Johnny Carson showing up to do what Johnny Carson did. Ed watched him walk across the floor, nodding to crew members, shaking hands with Doc, making a joke to one of the camera operators that made her laugh. Professional, controlled, giving everyone exactly what they needed to feel okay about what was happening. But Ed had known him too long. He saw the way Johnny's hand hesitated before touching the desk, saw the way his eyes scanned the audience without really seeing anyone, saw the micro-adjustment to his tie that meant he was running through the monologue in his head, making sure he knew where the beats were, where the pauses should land. A man preparing for a performance he'd given 4,531 times before, except this time there wouldn't be a 4,532. The warm-up guy was finishing his routine, getting the audience energized. Ed took his position stage left, where he'd stood for 3 decades, where his job was to laugh at Johnny's jokes and introduce the guests and be the reliable presence that made viewers feel like they were part of a club. He caught Johnny's eye. Johnny gave him the smallest nod. "We're doing this." The floor director started counting down. 5, 4, 3. The band hit the opening notes, and Ed McMahon took a breath and delivered the line he'd delivered thousands of times. From Hollywood, it's The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. The audience erupted. Johnny walked through the curtain, waving, smiling, perfect. He did the golf swing. He adjusted his jacket. He stepped up to the mark and waited for the applause to die down, which took longer than usual because everyone knew. He started the monologue. The jokes landed. The audience laughed in the right places. Johnny had the timing he'd spent a lifetime perfecting, knowing exactly when to pause, when to throw a look at the camera, when to let a joke die and move on. He was magnificent. He was in complete control. And Ed, watching from his spot, felt something he hadn't expected. Relief. Not because it was ending, he didn't want it to end, but because Johnny was proving, one last time, that he could do this. That whatever private war he fought with himself, whatever demons or doubts or exhaustion he carried, he could still show up and be Johnny Carson when it mattered. The show moved forward like a machine. Robin Williams was the first guest, manic and brilliant, doing voices and impressions, making Johnny laugh, really laugh, the kind you couldn't fake. Bette Midler was next, singing to Johnny, getting emotional in a way that would become the clip everyone remembered. But in the moment, watching it happen, Ed saw Johnny's face during the song, saw him holding it together, keeping the mask in place, even as Bette's voice cracked with feeling. Then it was just the two of them. The final segment. The guests had left. The band had played. The audience was silent in the way people get silent when they know they're witnessing something they'll tell their grandchildren about. Johnny sat at the desk. Ed sat in the chair to his left, where he always sat. They didn't have a script for this part. Johnny had refused to write one. "We'll know what to say," he'd told Fred. But now, sitting there, Ed wasn't sure that was true. He wasn't sure there were words for what this was. Johnny shuffled some cards that didn't have anything written on them. "So," he said. "So," Ed said. The audience laughed nervously. 30 years, Johnny said. 30 years. That's, Johnny paused. That's a lot of shows. 4,531, Ed said. But who's counting? Apparently you are. More laughter, but softer now. People weren't sure if they should laugh, if this was a comedy bit or something else. Johnny looked at the cards in his hands, put them down, picked them up again. This was the closest Ed had ever seen him to uncertain on camera. "I want to thank," Johnny started, then stopped. "There are a lot of people to thank. There are. The crew, the staff, the writers who made me sound smarter than I am." "Much smarter," Ed said. "Ed, yeah?" Johnny looked at him then, and for just a second, the curtain dropped. Not for the audience. They couldn't see it. But Ed could. He saw 30 years of 11:30 p.m.s and commercial breaks and inside jokes and silent understandings. He saw all the times Johnny had been difficult, demanding, closed off, impossible to reach, and all the times he'd been generous, brilliant, surprising, human. "Thank you," Johnny said quietly. Ed felt his throat tighten. For what? For showing up. It was such a small thing to say. 3 words that didn't begin to cover everything. But Ed understood what Johnny meant. Understood that in Johnny's language, in the vocabulary of a man who'd spent his life hiding behind jokes and timing and perfectly tailored suits, thank you for showing up meant, thank you for staying. Thank you for not asking for more than I could give. Thank you for knowing when to talk and when to be silent. Thank you for being the constant when everything else changed. Somebody had to, Ed managed. Johnny nodded, looked back at the camera. The mask was back in place, but not completely. Not like before. There was a crack in it, just visible enough to see something real underneath. He did his closing bit. Talked about the guest hosts who'd be filling in over the summer. People who'd eventually get their own shows, their own careers, standing on the foundation Johnny had built. He made jokes. He kept it light. He didn't get sentimental or weepy or dramatic, because that wasn't who Johnny Carson was. Johnny Carson was the man who showed up and did the job and made it look easy even when it wasn't, who kept America company through assassinations and scandals and wars and recessions, who gave people 90 minutes to forget whatever they were dealing with, who became so good at the performance that most people never questioned whether there was anything else beneath it. The show ended. The credits rolled. The audience stood and applauded and kept applauding and didn't want to stop. Johnny waved, smiled, did a little bow. Then he turned and walked off the stage, through the curtain, back into the hallway that was no longer empty. People lined it now. Crew members, writers, staff, everyone who'd been part of this thing. They applauded too. Some of them were crying. Johnny shook hands as he walked, said thank you, kept moving. Didn't stop until he reached his dressing room, and then he went inside and closed the door. All the way this time. Ed stood in the hallway, still holding the emotion from those last few minutes, not sure what to do with it. People were hugging each other, taking photos, opening champagne someone had brought, celebrating the end and mourning it at the same time. But Ed wasn't ready to celebrate yet. He walked to Johnny's door and stood outside it, like he had 3 hours earlier with the coffee. He could hear nothing from inside. No movement, no sound, just silence. He thought about knocking, thought about opening it and going in and saying, "What? What was there to say?" They'd already said everything that mattered in front of 50 million people, hadn't they? Or maybe they'd said nothing that mattered, and that was okay too. Ed raised his hand to knock, then stopped, because he suddenly understood something he hadn't before. Johnny didn't need him right now. For 30 years, Johnny had needed Ed to be there, to laugh at the jokes, to keep the energy up, to be the bridge between Johnny and everyone else. But now, in this moment, what Johnny needed was to be alone. To take off the suit and the mask and the performance and just be whoever he was when no one was watching. Ed lowered his hand. He turned and walked back down the hallway, past the celebrating crew, past the champagne and the tears and the bittersweet joy of something ending well. He walked out to the parking lot where his car was waiting, where the California evening was settling in warm and quiet. He sat in the driver's seat, but didn't start the engine. From here, he could see the window to Johnny's dressing room. The light was on. He could see Johnny's silhouette, just the shape of him, standing at the window again, looking out at the parking lot. Not moving. Not doing anything. Just standing there in the silence he'd finally earned. Ed watched for a minute. 2, 5. Then Johnny reached up and turned off the light. The window went dark. Ed started his car and drove home, leaving Johnny to whatever came next. To the retirement he'd claimed to want, to the quiet mornings and empty evenings and absence of the routine that had defined his life for 3 decades, to being nobody's host, nobody's comfort, nobody's nightly companion. Just Johnny, whoever that was. The next morning, Ed woke up at 3 p.m. like he had for 30 years. He made coffee, real coffee this time, not the decaf, and sat in his kitchen reading the reviews. Every newspaper in America had something to say about the end of The Tonight Show. Most of them were glowing. Some critics said it was the end of an era. Others said it was the end of a kind of television that would never exist again. Ed read them all but didn't feel anything. Because the show wasn't really over when the credits rolled last night. It was over in that hallway when he chose not to knock on Johnny's door. That was when he understood. They'd said their goodbye. Not with words or tears or dramatic declarations, but in the silence they'd shared, in the thank you that meant more than thank you, in 30 years of showing up for each other, even when everything else was falling apart. Some goodbyes happen in front of audiences. Some happen in empty hallways at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday when you realize the person you've worked with for 3 decades doesn't need you anymore, and that's exactly as it should be. Ed put down the newspaper. looked at the phone, thought about calling Johnny to see how he was doing. Didn't, because he knew Johnny wouldn't answer. And that was okay, because they'd already said everything that mattered in the silence before the last bow.